The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished floors of Dr. Sarah Mitchell's corner office in downtown Boston. At 42 years old, she had built herself into one of the most respected figures in the pharmaceutical industry. Her dark wooden desk, usually covered with stacks of papers and reports, was now cleared except for a single leather briefcase and her laptop. Today wasn't just another day at the office. Sarah checked her watch, 7:30 a.m. In 3 hours, she would be presenting a billion-dollar merger proposal to one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies on the West Coast. Her flight was scheduled for 9 a.m. from the private aviation terminal, giving her plenty of time to make the afternoon meeting in San Francisco. As Sarah gathered her things, her assistant Thomas knocked on the door. "Dr. Mitchell, your car is waiting downstairs." He walked in carrying her favorite travel mug filled with fresh green tea. Thomas had worked with her for 5 years and knew all her preferences by heart. "Thanks, Thomas. Did you double-check the flight details?" Sarah asked, smoothing down her navy blue blazer. She had chosen her outfit carefully: a crisp white blouse, tailored pants, and her lucky pearl necklace, a graduation gift from her late mother. "Yes, everything's confirmed. The pilot called to say they're ready whenever you arrive. Weather looks clear all the way to San Francisco," Thomas replied, handing her a folder with all the travel documents. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the familiar mix of excitement and pressure that came with big deals. At 15, she had promised her mother she would become someone important, someone who could make real change in the world. Now, 27 years later, she was doing exactly that. Her company's new cancer drug could help millions of people if this merger went through. The elevator ride to the lobby was quiet. Sarah used these moments to review the key points of her presentation in her head. Her Harvard MBA and 15 years of experience had taught her that preparation was everything. As chief financial officer of BioCure Pharmaceuticals, she had handled dozens of major deals, but this one felt different, more personal. Outside, her regular driver, Michael, stood beside the black company car. "Good morning, Dr. Mitchell," he said with a warm smile, opening the door for her. "Big day today?" "Very big, Michael," Sarah replied, settling into the back seat. She liked Michael. He had driven her for 3 years now and always knew when she needed quiet time to think and when she was up for conversation. As they drove through the morning traffic, Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her daughter Jasmine. "Knock them dead, Mom. Love you." Sarah smiled, feeling a surge of warmth. At 19, Jasmine was now a sophomore at Yale, following in her mother's footsteps with a pre-med major. The drive to the private aviation terminal usually took 30 minutes, but Michael knew all the shortcuts. They arrived in 25 minutes, pulling up to the elegant glass building that served Boston's corporate elite. Sarah had used this terminal dozens of times for business trips. The staff usually greeted her by name. "I'll wait here until you're safely inside, Dr. Mitchell," Michael said, helping her with her briefcase. This was their routine. He always made sure she got in safely before leaving. Sarah walked toward the entrance, her heels clicking against the pavement. Through the glass doors, she could see other executives in suits waiting in the lounge area. Her mind was already in San Francisco, reviewing market projections and acquisition costs. Just before reaching the door, she paused to check her reflection. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "Stand tall, baby girl. You belong in any room you walk into." Sarah adjusted her pearl necklace and straightened her shoulders. In her briefcase was a proposal that could change the face of cancer treatment. Years of research, countless late nights, and endless meetings had led to this moment. Little did she know, as she reached for the door handle, that this ordinary Thursday morning was about to become anything but ordinary. The next few hours would test not just her professional expertise, but her dignity, strength, and resolve in ways she never expected. As Sarah Mitchell stepped into the private aviation terminal, the cool air conditioning hit her face. The marble-floored lobby was busy with early morning travelers, most of them in business suits similar to hers. She had taken this same route to San Francisco at least a dozen times before. Walking towards the security checkpoint, Sarah noticed something different. Instead of Mark, the usual morning guard who always greeted her with a friendly smile, there was a new face. James Henderson stood at his post, a tall man with a stern expression who seemed to eye each traveler with suspicion. Sarah approached the checkpoint, holding out her credentials and flight documentation, the same papers she'd shown hundreds of times before. "Good morning," she said professionally. I'm here for the 9 a.m. flight to San Francisco. Henderson barely glanced at her documents. Instead, he looked directly at her with cold eyes. Ma'am, this is a private aviation terminal. Are you sure you're in the right place? The question hung in the air. Sarah felt her chest tighten slightly, but kept her voice steady. Yes, I'm certain. I'm Dr. Sarah Mitchell, CFO of BioCure Pharmaceuticals. Here are my credentials and flight details. She held the papers out again. Anyone can print papers, Henderson said, making no move to take them. Behind Sarah, a white executive walked up, and Henderson quickly waved him through with barely a glance at his documents. Sarah noticed this and took a deep breath. Sir, I've flown from this terminal many times. You can check with your supervisor or verify my credentials with the flight service. Listen, lady, Henderson said, his voice getting louder, we maintain certain standards here. Maybe you should check the commercial terminal. Several people in the lobby turned to watch the interaction. Just then, Thomas, Sarah's assistant, rushed through the door. He had driven separately to bring some last-minute documents she needed. Seeing the situation unfold, he quickly pulled out his phone and began recording. Is there a problem here? Thomas asked, stepping beside Sarah. His phone was clearly visible, capturing everything. This woman claims she has a private flight, Henderson said, emphasizing the word claims with obvious doubt. We need to maintain security protocols. Sarah remained remarkably calm, though her heart was racing. Sir, I'll ask one more time. Please review my credentials properly, or call your supervisor. I have an important meeting to attend. Other travelers had stopped to watch. Among them was Richard Chen, CEO of a tech company, who recognized Sarah from a business conference last year. He stepped forward. Excuse me, but that's Dr. Mitchell. She's one of the top executives in Boston. I've seen her here numerous times. Henderson's face reddened, but he doubled down. Well, if she's such an important person, she should have no problem providing additional verification. We can't be too careful these days. Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out her company ID, her pilot's certification. She had learned to fly small planes years ago, and her Harvard MBA alumni card. She laid them all on the security desk, one by one, her movements deliberate and dignified. Here are 5 different forms of identification, plus my flight documentation and company credentials. Would you like to explain which certain standards these don't meet? Her voice was calm but firm, carrying clearly across the now silent lobby. Thomas was still recording, capturing Henderson's visible discomfort. More people had gathered, including Jane Martinez, the terminal's morning supervisor, who had just arrived for her shift. What's going on here? Martinez asked, quickly walking over. She immediately recognized Sarah. Dr. Mitchell, I'm so sorry for any delay. Is everything all right? Before Sarah could answer, Henderson interrupted. I was just following security protocols. You can't be too careful about who you let into a private terminal. Martinez looked from Henderson to Sarah, quickly understanding the situation. Dr. Mitchell is one of our regular clients, Mr. Henderson. Her credentials are more than adequate. She turned to Sarah. Please, go right ahead. Your pilot called to say they're ready for you. As Sarah walked through the checkpoint, head held high, she could hear Martinez beginning to reprimand Henderson. The other travelers watched her pass, some shaking their heads in disgust at what they'd witnessed. Thomas followed close behind, his phone still recording what would soon become a viral video that would spark a national conversation. Thomas's hands were perfectly steady as he held his phone, capturing every second of the confrontation. As a former journalism student before becoming an executive assistant, he knew exactly what details mattered. His camera caught Henderson's dismissive gestures, the other travelers' reactions, and most importantly, Sarah's composed professionalism in the face of blatant discrimination. Keep recording, Sarah said quietly to Thomas as they walked toward the waiting area. She pulled out her own phone and began taking notes, writing down exactly what had happened, including times and names. Years of corporate experience had taught her the importance of documentation. Back at the security desk, Henderson was facing an increasingly uncomfortable situation. Jane Martinez, the supervisor, wasn't letting him off easily. We have strict policies against discriminatory behavior, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Dr. Mitchell is one of our most respected clients. Thomas's recording captured this too, along with the murmurs of other travelers who had witnessed everything. Richard Chen, the tech CEO who had spoken up earlier, approached Sarah in the waiting area. "Dr. Mitchell, I have my legal team on speed dial," he offered, holding up his phone. "What happened here was completely unacceptable. My company's lawyers would be happy to help." Sarah thanked him but kept typing on her phone. She wasn't just writing notes anymore. She was composing an email to the terminal's corporate headquarters. Her fingers moved quickly across the screen as she detailed the incident with the precision of someone used to writing board reports. Meanwhile, Thomas's video was already making its way through various channels. He had sent it to BioCure's public relations team, who immediately recognized its significance. Within minutes, they were calling him back. "This is exactly what needs to be seen," said Maria Santos, the PR director, over the phone. "Dr. Mitchell, should we release an official statement?" Thomas put the call on speaker so Sarah could hear. Sarah looked up from her phone. "Not yet," she said firmly. "Let's handle this systematically." She had learned long ago that rushed reactions rarely led to lasting change. Other passengers were now approaching her, offering their contact information as witnesses. A young black woman in medical school scrubs came up with tears in her eyes. "Dr. Mitchell, I followed your career for years. Seeing you stand up to him like that, it means everything." Thomas kept recording as more people came forward. His camera caught the way Sarah took time with each person, especially the young medical student. "What's your name?" she asked the young woman. "Jasmine Thompson," the student replied. "I'm in my residency at Boston General." Sarah smiled, thinking of her own daughter, also named Jasmine. "Keep pushing forward, Dr. Thompson," she said warmly. "Every door we open makes it easier for those who come after us." The terminal was buzzing now. Henderson had disappeared from his post, replaced by another security guard who looked nervously in Sarah's direction. Jane Martinez was on the phone, her gestures suggesting she was talking to someone important. Thomas finally lowered his phone when Sarah's pilot approached. "Dr. Mitchell, we're ready when you are," the pilot said, looking concerned. "We heard about what happened. Should we delay the flight?" Sarah checked her watch. Despite the incident, they were still on schedule. "No need," she said. "We have a merger meeting in San Francisco, and this situation doesn't change that." She gathered her things, her movements as composed as ever. Before heading to the tarmac, Sarah turned to Thomas. "Send me the video, but don't share it publicly yet. There's a right way to handle this." Her mind was already working on a larger plan, one that would turn this ugly incident into meaningful change. As they walked toward the plane, Thomas could see his video was already getting attention. His phone kept buzzing with notifications. The PR team had shared it with BioCure's executive board, and messages of support were pouring in. Sarah paused at the foot of the plane's stairs. The morning sun caught her pearl necklace, her mother's necklace, and she touched it briefly. "Mom always said that how you handle obstacles matters more than the obstacles themselves," she said quietly to Thomas. The young medical student, Jasmine Thompson, watched from the terminal window as Sarah climbed the stairs to her plane. She wasn't just watching a CEO board a private jet. She was watching history in the making, though none of them knew it yet. The private jet climbed through the clouds, leaving Boston behind. Sarah sat in her leather seat, laptop open in front of her, but her mind wasn't on the merger documents. Instead, she was watching Thomas's video for the third time, studying every detail of her confrontation with Henderson. "Thomas," she said, looking up from the screen, "I want you to send this video to Linda Carter in Human Resources and Marcus Wong in Legal." Her voice was calm but determined. After 20 years in corporate America, Sarah knew exactly how to handle workplace discrimination, and this time, she had it on video. The flight attendant offered her coffee, but Sarah asked for green tea instead. She needed to stay focused. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since takeoff. Messages poured in from other executives, board members, and even competitors who had heard about the incident. "Dr. Mitchell," Thomas said, looking up from his tablet, "the video is spreading inside the company. The Boston Globe just called our PR team for a comment." He paused, then added, "And your daughter Jasmine keeps texting me since you're not answering your phone." Sarah smiled slightly, thinking of her passionate daughter. "Tell her I'm fine and I'll call her after the merger meeting." She turned back to her laptop, but instead of opening the merger presentation, she opened a new document and began typing. "What are you writing?" Thomas asked, curious about her calm focus. "A proposal," Sarah replied, her fingers moving steadily across the keyboard. "Not just about Henderson. This is about systematic change." She had spent years dealing with subtle discrimination, the doubting looks, the extra questions, the constant need to prove herself. But this time was different. The pilot announced they were halfway to San Francisco. Sarah had 3 hours to prepare, both for the merger meeting and for what she knew would become a major story. Her proposal took shape as the plane crossed over Nebraska. Immediate investigation into security protocols. Mandatory bias training for all terminal staff. Review of past discrimination complaints. New hiring and training procedures. Regular audits of security interactions. Support program for affected travelers. Thomas watched her work, amazed at how she could turn an ugly incident into an opportunity for real change. "Should we delay releasing the video?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "No delays. We release it my way." She picked up her phone and called Maria Santos in PR. "Maria, I'm sending you a document. This isn't just about one racist guard. We're going to change how private aviation handles security nationwide." As they approached California, Sarah finally opened her merger presentation. The deal was worth billions, but now it felt small compared to what she was planning. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Richard Chen, the CEO who had witnessed everything. "Just heard from my contacts," his message read. "Henderson has a history of similar incidents at other facilities. 3 formal complaints in 2 years, never investigated." Sarah forwarded the message to her legal team. The plane started its descent into San Francisco, and she closed her laptop. Thomas looked worried. "Are you ready for the merger meeting?" he asked. "The merger can wait," Sarah replied, straightening her mother's pearl necklace. "First, we're meeting with the Aviation Facilities Board of Directors. They're waiting for us at the terminal." Her voice carried the same quiet authority it had shown during the confrontation. As the plane touched down in San Francisco, Sarah's proposal had already reached the aviation company's headquarters. Her phone lit up with a message from their CEO. "Dr. Mitchell, we need to talk. This is our highest priority." Sarah looked out the window at the California sun. She thought about Jasmine Thompson, the young medical student in Boston, and all the others who faced similar barriers. "Yes," she replied to the CEO's message, "we absolutely need to talk." The plane taxied to a stop. Through the window, Sarah could see a group of serious-looking executives waiting on the tarmac. They had no idea that the woman they were about to meet had spent the last 5 hours planning not just to address one incident, but to change their entire industry. The video hit social media at exactly 3:00 p.m. Eastern Time. Within an hour, it had been viewed over 1 million times. People watched as Henderson questioned Sarah's credentials, as she maintained her dignity, and as others came to her defense. But it wasn't just the incident that caught people's attention, it was Sarah's response. "This isn't the first time this has happened, and sadly, it won't be the last," Sarah said in her official statement, released alongside the video. "But this time, we have proof. This time, we can make real change." News channels picked up the story quickly. CNN, MSNBC, and other major networks ran the footage on their evening broadcasts. Headlines appeared across the country. "Racial profiling at private aviation terminal caught on camera," and "Top executive faces discrimination." The video that's shocking America. Back in her San Francisco hotel room after a successful merger meeting, Sarah watched as her story spread. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing. Even her daughter Jasmine called from Yale, her voice full of emotion. "Mom, you're trending on Twitter," Jasmine exclaimed. "My whole dorm is talking about it. You're showing everyone how to stand up for themselves." Thomas, still managing the flood of media requests, entered with a fresh cup of green tea. "Dr. Mitchell, Anderson Cooper wants to interview you tomorrow morning. The Today Show, too. And Michelle Obama just shared the video with a powerful message about ongoing discrimination in America." Sarah took a sip of her tea, thinking carefully. She hadn't wanted to become the face of this fight, but now she had a platform. Schedule Anderson Cooper, she decided. But make sure they also interview Jasmine Thompson, that medical student from the terminal. Her story matters too. The aviation company's response came swiftly. They announced Henderson's immediate suspension and launched a full investigation. But Sarah's viral video had opened a floodgate. Other travelers began sharing their own stories of discrimination at various terminals and airports across the country. Hashtag Flying While Black started trending on Twitter. People shared thousands of similar experiences. Some were famous athletes and entertainers, others were business leaders, and many were everyday travelers who had faced the same treatment but hadn't been able to prove it. "Look at this," Thomas said, showing Sarah his tablet. Her story had made it to international news. The BBC was covering it. Papers in London, Paris, and Tokyo ran the story. The video had now been viewed over 10 million times. Sarah's inbox filled with messages of support from other executives. CEOs of major airlines called to discuss improving their security training. Civil rights organizations reached out to partner with her. Harvard Business School asked her to speak about leadership in the face of discrimination. But the most touching responses came from young professionals. Dr. Mitchell's response shows us how to be strong and professional even when facing racism, wrote one young banker on LinkedIn. She didn't just get angry, she got strategic. In Boston, the private aviation terminal was dealing with a PR nightmare. Their phones rang constantly. Protesters gathered outside with signs reading, "Stop security racism" and "Check your bias." Other clients threatened to take their business elsewhere. Sarah watched it all unfold from her hotel room, feeling both overwhelmed and determined. She opened her laptop and began working on a new document, not about the incident, but about solutions. She typed the title, "Beyond Awareness: Creating Real Change in Aviation Security." Thomas, she called to her assistant, who was still fielding calls, "Get me a meeting with the National Aviation Security Council. It's time to take this conversation national." As evening fell in San Francisco, Sarah stood at her hotel window, looking out at the city lights. Her mother's pearl necklace caught the reflection of her laptop screen. She thought about how her mother had always taught her to turn obstacles into opportunities. The next morning, millions of Americans would wake up to Sarah's interview on CNN, but they wouldn't see an angry victim. Instead, they would see a powerful executive calmly explaining how to transform an industry. The hashtag #BeLikeSarah was already spreading, celebrating not just her stand against racism, but her strategic response to it. Mom would be proud, Sarah whispered to herself, touching the pearls at her neck. Tomorrow would bring more interviews, more meetings, and more opportunities to create change. She was ready for all of it. 1 week after the incident, the aviation company's boardroom was unusually full. Top executives sat around the massive oak table, their faces serious as they reviewed the investigation's findings. On the screen at the front of the room, Sarah's video played one more time. Linda Martinez, the head investigator, stood up with a thick folder in her hands. "What we found goes far beyond one security guard," she began. "In the past 3 years, we've had 27 similar complaints that were never properly investigated." The CEO, Robert Phillips, removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. The investigation had revealed uncomfortable truths about his company. Henderson wasn't just one bad employee, he was a symptom of a bigger problem. "Show them Henderson's hiring record," Linda continued. She pulled up a new document on the screen. He was fired from 2 previous security jobs for similar behavior, but our HR department never checked his references properly. In Boston, the terminal where the incident happened was going through major changes. Security cameras were being reviewed, showing Henderson's pattern of treating travelers differently based on their race. White executives passed through quickly, while people of color faced extra questioning and delays. Thomas, who had been gathering evidence for Sarah, discovered even more. "Dr. Mitchell," he said during their morning meeting, "we found social media posts from Henderson. They're pretty bad." He handed her his tablet, showing posts filled with racist comments and discriminatory views. Sarah read through them carefully. "Forward these to the investigation team," she said. "But remember, this isn't about punishing one person. It's about fixing a broken system." The investigation spread to other terminals. Similar patterns emerged across the country. Private aviation, it turned out, had a serious problem with racial profiling. Security staff often made assumptions about who looked like they belonged on private jets. At Yale, Sarah's daughter Jasmine organized a student forum about the incident. "My mom didn't just complain," she told the crowd. "She didn't just get angry. She gathered evidence, built a case, and pushed for real change. That's how you transform discrimination into progress. Back in the boardroom, Linda continued her presentation. We interviewed over 100 employees. Many wanted to report problems before but feared losing their jobs. There was no clear system for handling discrimination complaints. Robert Phillips stood up. As CEO, he knew this was his responsibility. I want a complete overhaul of our security protocols, he announced. New training programs, new hiring procedures, new complaint systems, and I want Dr. Mitchell to oversee these changes. Sarah received the call while reviewing merger documents in her office. We want you to lead our new diversity and security task force, Robert told her. You'll have full authority to make changes across all our terminals. She thought about it for a moment, touching her mother's pearls. I'll do it, she said, but with one condition. I want Jasmine Thompson, that medical student from the terminal, on the team. We need fresh perspectives from the next generation. The investigation's findings made national news again. Private aviation company reveals systemic discrimination, read the headlines. But this time, the story wasn't just about problems, it was about solutions. Thomas organized the data into clear charts and graphs. Look at these numbers, he said, showing Sarah. In some terminals, people of color were 15 times more likely to face extra security checks. But nobody was tracking these statistics before. Sarah studied the data carefully. Years of pharmaceutical research had taught her that numbers tell important stories. These numbers told a story of systematic bias that needed to change. The investigation's final report was 300 pages long. It detailed every complaint, every incident, and every missed opportunity to address discrimination. But its most important section was the last chapter, recommendations for change. We're not just going to write a report, Sarah told the board. We're going to remake private aviation security. Every terminal, every employee, every procedure will change. And we're going to share our findings with other industries. As she left the boardroom that day, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. Proud of you, Mom. You're not just helping yourself, you're helping everyone who comes after you. Sarah smiled, knowing that sometimes the biggest changes start with one person simply standing their ground. 3 months after the incident, the private aviation terminal in Boston looked very different. New signs hung on the walls. Respect, dignity, and fair treatment for all passengers. But the real changes went far deeper than signs. Sarah stood at the front of the terminal's largest conference room. In front of her sat 50 security officers, all wearing new uniforms with body cameras. This was the 4th training session she had led this week. Security is important, she told them, but so is respect. Today, we'll learn how to maintain both. Behind her, a screen showed examples of proper and improper screening procedures. The security staff took notes, many of them nodding in agreement. Henderson's replacement, Maria Rodriguez, raised her hand. Dr. Mitchell, what if we're unsure about someone's credentials? It was the question everyone wanted to ask. Sarah smiled. Good question. Let me show you our new verification system. She picked up her phone and demonstrated the new app that could quickly verify any passenger's credentials without discrimination or harassment. In the corner of the room, Jasmine Thompson watched carefully. The young medical student had become an important part of the changes. We're also creating a feedback system, Jasmine explained to the group. Every passenger can rate their security experience using this same app. The changes weren't just happening in Boston. Across the country, private aviation terminals were adopting what they now called the Mitchell Protocol. Simple, clear rules that ensured both security and respect. Thomas entered the room with fresh data on his tablet. Dr. Mitchell, look at these numbers, he said excitedly. Passenger complaints are down 90% since we started the new procedures, and security is actually more effective. Sarah wasn't surprised. She had learned long ago that treating people with respect usually led to better results. The new system was proving her right. The biggest change was in hiring. Every security officer now went through detailed background checks and bias training. We don't just check their work history, Sarah explained to the board. We look at their social media, their references, their understanding of diversity. In the terminal's break room, veteran security officers chatted with new hires. It's actually easier this way, one officer said. Clear rules, No guessing, and everyone gets treated the same. Plus, the passengers are happier. Sarah's phone buzzed with a message from her daughter at Yale. Mom, my business ethics professor just made your case a required reading. The story of her stand against discrimination had become a teaching tool in colleges across the country. The aviation company's CEO, Robert Phillips, visited the Boston terminal to see the changes himself. This is impressive, he said, watching the smooth, respectful security process. We're getting calls from other industries asking about our new procedures. Sarah had insisted that all changes be practical and measurable. Each terminal now had clear performance metrics, processing times, passenger satisfaction scores, and regular audits of security footage to ensure fair treatment. The key was making it simple, she explained to a group of industry leaders. Clear procedures, good training, and zero tolerance for discrimination. It's not complicated, it just needs commitment. Even the physical layout of security checkpoints had changed. Gone were the intimidating dark corners and isolated screening areas. The new design was open, well-lit, and professional. Jasmine Thompson, still balancing medical school with her role in the changes, developed a special training program for handling high-stress situations. Sometimes people are rushed or anxious, she taught the security staff. We need to stay professional no matter what. The costs of all these changes were significant, but Robert Phillips didn't mind. Our reputation has improved, our legal risks are down, and our customers are happier, he told the board. This is good business. Sarah walked through the terminal, watching the new systems in action. Security officers greeted every passenger with the same professional respect. The body cameras recorded every interaction. The verification app made credentials clear and simple. Dr. Mitchell called a young black executive rushing to her flight. Thank you, flying is actually pleasant now. Sarah smiled, remembering her own experience just 3 months ago. That evening, as she prepared to board her own flight, Sarah passed through security smoothly. The same checkpoint where she had faced discrimination now operated with perfect professionalism. She touched her mother's pearls and smiled. Sometimes she thought, the best revenge is making things better for everyone who comes after you. 1 year after the incident, Sarah Mitchell stood on a stage at Harvard Business School. The auditorium was packed with students, business leaders, and aviation industry executives. Behind her, a large screen showed the title of her presentation, From Incident to Impact, Transforming Corporate Culture. Change doesn't always start with big plans, she began, touching her mother's pearl necklace. Sometimes it starts with one person simply refusing to accept unfair treatment. The audience listened intently as she shared her story. In the front row, Thomas sat with his tablet, showing impressive statistics. The Mitchell Protocol had been adopted by over 200 private aviation terminals nationwide. Discrimination complaints had dropped by 95%. Security effectiveness had improved by 40%. Jasmine Thompson, now in her final year of medical school, was also there. She had become a regular speaker at these events, sharing her perspective as both a witness to the original incident and a key player in creating change. My mother always told me to be ready for my moment, Sarah continued. But more importantly, she taught me to use that moment to help others. She clicked to the next slide, showing pictures of the new mentorship program she had started. The program, called Next Generation Leaders, paired experienced executives with young professionals from underrepresented groups. It had already helped hundreds of young people navigate corporate challenges and build successful careers. In the audience, Robert Phillips, the aviation company's CEO, nodded in approval. His company had become a model for corporate transformation. Other industries, hotels, restaurants, banks, were now copying their approach to security and customer service. But the real success isn't in the numbers, Sarah explained. It's in the stories I hear every day. She shared messages from travelers who no longer feared discrimination at airports, from young executives who felt more confident in their careers, and from security officers who preferred the new, fair system. Thomas stood up to share some recent news. Just this morning, he announced, the Federal Aviation Administration recommended the Mitchell Protocol as the new standard for all private aviation security nationwide. The audience broke into applause. Sarah's daughter Jasmine, watching online from Yale, sent a quick text. Mom, you're trending again. Hashtag Mitchell Protocol is number one. But this time, the trending topic wasn't about discrimination, it was about positive change. The changes had spread beyond aviation. Major corporations were now sending their security staff to training programs based on Sarah's model. Hotels, sports venues, and office buildings had adopted similar protocols. "Remember that young medical student in the terminal?" Sarah asked the audience. Dr. Thompson is now leading her own program at Boston General Hospital, making sure patients receive equal treatment regardless of their background. In the back of the auditorium, a group of security officers from the Boston terminal watched proudly. Their workplace had become a national model. They wore badges that read "Dignity and Security," a reminder that both were possible at the same time. Sarah showed a final slide, a picture of her mother. "She taught me that true success isn't just about climbing the corporate ladder," she said. "It's about reaching back and helping others climb with you." After the presentation, young professionals lined up to talk with her. Many shared their own stories of facing discrimination, but now they also shared stories of standing up, speaking out, and creating change. Dr. Mitchell, one young executive, said, "Your story taught me not to just accept unfair treatment. It showed me how to change it." Sarah smiled, remembering how she had felt that day in the terminal. That evening, Sarah returned to the same terminal where everything had started. The place looked different now, brighter, more professional, more welcoming. Security officers greeted every passenger with the same respect. As she walked through security, Sarah noticed a small plaque on the wall. It read, "Every person deserves respect. Every moment is a chance for change." Below these words was the date of her incident, now remembered not as a day of discrimination, but as the beginning of transformation. On the plane home, Sarah received one last message. It was from Henderson, the former security guard. "Dr. Mitchell," he wrote, "your response to my terrible behavior taught me more than 1,000 diversity trainings. Thank you for making me face my biases and change." Sarah touched her mother's pearls one last time before the plane took off. Sometimes, she thought, the biggest victories don't come from defeating others, but from transforming them into allies for change.